Welcome to the UP Notable Books Club, brought to you by the Upper Peninsula Publisher and Authors Association. Raymond Luczak is perhaps best known for his books, films, and plays. He was raised in Ironwood, a small mining town in Michigan's Upper Peninsula, number 7 in a family of 9 children. He lost much of his hearing due to double pneumonia at the age of 8 months. After high school graduation, Luczak went on to Gallaudet University in Washington, D.C., where he earned a BA in English. He learned American Sign Language and became involved with the deaf community and won numerous scholarships in recognition of his writing, including the Ritz-Paris Hemingway Scholarship. He took various writing courses at other schools in the area, which culminated in winning a place in the Jenny McKean Moore Fiction Workshop at the George Washington University. Recent works include Compassion, Michigan, The Ironwood Stories, Chlorophyll, Poems about Michigan's Upper Peninsula, and the anthology Upper Poetry, which has resulted in launching the critically acclaimed Upper Poetry series, edited by Luczak.
I am so delighted to have Raymond back, a 2-time UP notable author, and he is joined this evening with his friend Adam, who is interpreting for him. Now, Adam's screen says Scott, but he is really Adam. So this is the book we're going to be talking about tonight, Animals Out There, WILD. And I'm excited because it was really fun talking to Raymond last time. Just one little housekeeping thing from me before I pass it over to Victor, who gives us our Upper Peninsula Publishers and Authors Association notes. He tells us some updates. But before he does, next month, this is our book, Michigan Indian Boarding School Survivors Speak Out. It's a nonfiction book, a narrative history written by Sharon Marie Brunner, and it is not terribly long. 160, well, that's even with the notes at the end, 166 pages. But again, a big piece of our history. So I'm kind of excited to read this one here. And that is our May selection. So I will now turn it over to Victor to give us a little bit of UPA news.
Thank you, Evelyn. Again, my name is Victor Volkman. I am the current president of the Upper Peninsula Publishers and Authors Association, UPPAA. I still have trouble saying it correctly, even after all these years. So I will talk just a few minutes about one of my favorite programs that we do, and it's called Young Writers Storytelling Workshop, and it happens on May 17th, 2025, and it will bring young writers from grades 5 to 12 from all over the Upper Peninsula together to learn more about writing, to improve their craft, improve their understanding of plot, and making exciting characters and evoking emotions and all the things that make stories worth reading. Now, enrollment is strictly set at 30 people, 30 students maximum. We only have room for 5 more young writers. So I challenge you, if you have a daughter, a son, a niece, a nephew, a grandchild who likes to write, please go to storytellingworkshop.org. That's storytellingworkshop.org. Or you can go to our site, UPPAA.org, and you can sign them up. It only costs $25, and they will be taught by award-winning writers who are Upers themselves, and we want to bring the next generation up with us. So please share the word if you can. And that is all I'm going to say for now.
Okay, thank you, Victor.
So also, it's one of the great things about Zoom is that people from all over the US can come in and join us, even if they're not currently in the UP. So first of all, my name is Raymond Luczak, and signed like this. And I think some of you have seen some of my prior books, as I was in the UP Notable Book Fair a couple years ago. I was here sharing Once Upon a Time, Once Upon a Twin. And I have a number of books that speak to UP particular experiences. And each of these three different stories, my mom told me three different stories about a twin that I'd had that was miscarried. And so what I wondered was, would my life had been like had my twin survived? So that was that book. And that now my new one, Animals Out There Wild, is a more unusual book. What's very different about this, as you'll note, I'm going to explain its differences in a bit, but first, I'm going to tell you a little bit about this. I think most of the audience is probably not that well versed in deaf culture and American Sign Language, so I'm going to give you a little bit of background to the book. When people talk about deaf literature, that can include works by deaf people that were written or composed in American Sign Language. Now, when we talk about deaf poetry, much like written poetry, much like English poetry can be written, but it can be signed as well. Now, when it's signed poetry in ASL that's not composed in English and is created as an original work in American Sign Language first, there are some unique features of ASL poetry that mirror some English features. Now, just some simpler examples. ASL is a very complex language, and as is English. But let's look at just some examples in English that you would have heard. You've heard, I'm sure, of rhyme as one of the key features. Rhyme sets pace and beat, things like that, rhyme, rhythm, meter. Now, we have many of these same concepts in American Sign Language, but it's often expressed by using the same hand shape across sides. So just as a random example right now, I don't know how Adam is going to voice this, but I'm not expecting Adam to give a full translation of this. And actually don't voice this part, but notice my hand shapes, okay? I'm going to make this up right now. So see, this flat hand shape is key to the rhyme and meter. And so it's not much form. It doesn't mean that much, but all of those thoughts were expressed in that same hand shape. So that is the rhyming factor across that poem. Now, the next point to discuss here is that usually in my work, it's written in English first. I compose in English, and then when I perform my work in ASL, I'm actually engaging in an act of translation, translating that into American Sign Language. And there's a great deal that goes into that. So just a little bit of background there to clear that up. Now, in this book, I'm using what's called gloss. And gloss is, at its simplest, it's a way of representing signs. So English has its own word order and sentence structure. ASL has a very different one, but it also has a sentence structure. It's simply not like English. And so when there's no written system that has been standardized and adopted across the deaf community that has been agreed upon by linguists for notational system for sign language as yet. And so there's no way to document what signs look like. And because sign language is so complex, and let's just look at this as an example of this. And if you were trying to note what signs were happening, you have to note what's the eyebrow position, what signs were repeated, what was the distance proximal to the body, what was the hold movement, hold pattern and rhythm, what were the hand shapes, position, orientation, all of that. There's so many factors to notate that it's near impossible. Linguists have worked on this, and then with whatever the notation system, if you hand that to two different linguists, they'll translate it into different things. So there's not yet a concise way of translating sign language to a written word without boring you to tears. So this is where gloss comes in. Some deaf people use what's called gloss. And some people refer to it as bad English or a way of representing the ASL thing that's been said with English words, but in an ASL word order. So as an example, and this is a classic example used when you're talking about the differences between ASL and English. Yesterday, I saw the sunrise. That's how you would state that sentence in English. In ASL, and I'm going to ask Adam to voice the gloss here as I say it. Okay? Let's see. Sunrise, me, saw yesterday. And it sounds very odd to the English ear, but that's the English sentence structure. So keep in mind a couple of things here. The basic ASL sentence structure is topic comment structure. And that's what gloss is representing as the topic comment. And in this one example, sunrise is the topic. And then I add information specifying more about that sunrise. Now, the second thing to note here is that I'll also put the time order. So for example, the sunrise comes first, then next I will say sunrise, then I was born to see. So yesterday. You see, so this is just a basic rough overview of ASL grammar. So now that that concept is clear, I want to tell you a little more about the book and what it's about. You see the title says animals. So that's the topic. Out there, wild. Topic comment structure. But now when I say wild, and you see I position that sign out there further from the body. And so typically signing space is usually fairly concise, close to the body. But I'm invoking that sense of threat from something out there and wild and putting it at a space away from the body. And so what kind of animals are covered in the book? Well, all of the animals in the book live in the UP. It's the whole world of wild animals that live in the Upper Peninsula. And if you look at the book itself, on the left-hand side of the page, you'll see the text. The English text is there. And then on the opposite side, you'll see it written in ASL Gloss. So if you don't know ASL, you can still get a sense of what that structure looks like. And so if a word is fingerspelled, you'll see letter dash, letter dash, letter dash to represent that fingerspelled in the manual alphabet. So the first ASL gloss that I'm going to show you for the first film, for the first poem, it's going to be a little odd to your eyes, and that's going to be okay. Now, be patient with the technology. I've never shared this PDF through Zoom before. It's going to be my first time working through that. So give me a moment. Apologies in advance. Okay. Okay, is that clear? Okay. So the first poem is called Tardigrade. Now, a tardigrade is an extremely small creature called a water bear, microscopic animal that can live without oxygen. Okay. So it's incredibly microscopic. Now, as you look at the poem on the screen, you look at that first line and you'll see the parentheses offset. That indicates the use of a classifier. So a classifier, this is a little more about ASL and its grammar and structure. So a classifier is something that is not in itself just a sign for a word. It instead stands in for a thing. So, and you can put that thing in context. So just as an example, if you didn't know the title of this, this is what you would say. This is the tardigrade. All right. But I've also given it the English title tardigrade. So you know the context of that classifier. Without that context, the sign, the classifier wouldn't make sense. So I'm going to give you a chance to read that, and then I'm going to perform that poem. And then for the rest of them, I'm going to be signing the poems in ASL Gloss, and I'm going to be following the ASL structure. But then you will hear, see, and watch. You'll hear the English spoken, but I'll be performing it in an American Sign Language, and you'll see the gloss on the screen. So you'll see how the signs match up with the lines. Okay. So, and the next poem I'll show you the English as opposed to that, the English version. This is the English version. You don't have to read through quick entirely, but just scan it and see some of the differences. Okay. So once again, the poems and the book are all very short, 15-line poems. Okay. So now I'm going to go back to the gloss part so you can see what that looks like, and then hear it in English. Tardigrade. 8-legged, they slow step, a steady march among moss and lichen. A fallen log is an entire planet, cratered by the showers of season. Any place beyond this log is unfathomable, like the Upper Peninsula. Okay, so hopefully as you watch more of these, it'll become clearer. So now the next poem. There, now I've got your full attention. Hoorah. Okay, the next poem is entitled Eagle. And once again, you can hear the poem in English and you'll see it in ASL, both performed. Eagle, found with a broken wing, she was brought to the zoo. Her world is a window. No more sky and treetops, just reliable meals. She stands bitterly on a fallen log, punctuated by talents, her proximity discomforting me. She narrows her eyes at me, daring to take pictures. The only way she can survive is her endless calculating, the thrill of the kill. Okay, so the next poem is called Tadpole. Now, a bit of preface to this. And the Montreal River, for those of you that don't live in the UP, it's in the upper border between the UP, Michigan, and Wisconsin, right? That's its course. And so living on the Michigan side of the border between Wisconsin, okay, that's all you really need to know. The title is Tadpole. Back then, right, in those days, Montreal River was rarely clear, but when it was, I could read them darting their eyes, tiny as periods, searching for the perfect sentence to end so they could become stories, hopping free. Okay, the next one is entitled Flea, and sad to say we do still have fleas, as much as we might not want them. Okay, flea. It all starts with an itch here and there. I never think much of it. Then I catch my dog trying to scratch again. So until then, they stay vampires, nestled in fur, claws locked in, the jugular percolating, the sweetest blood. Oh, juicy, right? Okay, now the next poem is called Strider. And I used this poem entitled Strider. This one is a little bit longer, but I've asked Adam to read it out in English first. And it'll take a couple minutes to read that first. And then that way, when people watch it, and of course, people that are blind that couldn't see it visually will have access. So I'm going to have him do that now. I'll give him a moment. Strider. Even in the hot peat of summer, the pond is ice enough for them to skate across, their slenderness a shadow floating in the breeze. I was always afraid of water, even with lifeguards nearby. How I wanted to skate across the glass of my drowning. Okay, so this poem has 46 words. But when I sign it, it makes up only 14 signs. And obviously, I can't have the interpreter align 46 words in English with 14 signs in gloss. That's why I've asked Adam to give you just the pre-reading of it so that you can watch it performed. Now, for the ASL. And it's a quick translation, as I said. So that's a great example of where English has this voluble, long, and complicated sentences, and ASL can express much the same in a much more concise manner. Okay, now, Robin. And now, growing up in Michigan in the Upper Peninsula, I think, when you're waiting for the melt, and it just seems to take forever, one of the things that I noticed growing up as a boy in the 70s and 80s here, and this is the strangest sign of spring, but it's the robin. Okay. Robin. Strange how they'd managed to hide all winter long. The 2 apple trees in our backyard never burst into blossoms until they revealed their red-orange breasts, the first of spring to come, the first of autumn to disappear. Okay, so let me tell you a little bit about this one. I was telling you a little bit about ASL poetry and how we'll use rhyming hand shapes. And playing with ASL and ASL Gloss, that kind of influenced how I sign this as well, the way I write it. So I'm using just 2 hand shapes the entire poem. I'm using the A hand shape that you see here. It looks like the letter A in the manual alphabet. Okay. And also, you'll notice that I have words like lips and things like that, and gibberish, things like are all caps. Those are showing what's happening with the expressions, what's happening in the non-manual markers on the face. And I think sometimes when people look at, when hearing people talk to deaf people, they're just trying to talk with their mouths and with their lips and not with any of the rest of themselves. But anyway, okay, so I have this, and then the lowercase letters they're all uppercase. It indicates like the expressions of disgust and so forth. And so this indicates how I'm to read the line. Turtle. Okay, and this is the sign for turtle, and I absolutely love that sign. As I was a kid, there were some signs that were always favorites, and that one is turtle, the one I'm doing right now. Okay. Turtle. May the alkalinity of my anger. Righteously mine, filter right out the house of me. May the weight of my gravel tears slide off the roof of my bruises, so I may sail down the river. Up Lake Superior, where I'll never need a house like that. So the last one here is entitled Duck. I never knew his name, but he was quite a sight. So beautiful. His hair, a slick dark green, his collar, a white ring, his suit jacket, buffed in earth tones. The boy I loved from afar was a swan. Good. So, and yeah, happy to talk with you and some Q&A and all of that. So we can take this off of the screen now and then go back to whoever wants to ask a question can do so. Okay, just hold on. There we go.
Okay. Would
Okay,
anyone
and
like to
I'm
ask?
open to questions. Whoever wants to ask, and Adam will interpret the questions into ASL. So go ahead. Any questions?
Okay, Sue has a question. So she just took herself off mute. Okay.
Yeah, always. How beautiful. Oh my word. You're so beautiful. And such a different language. I had no idea. And elegant. And the book was wonderful to read. Wonderful to read. And it took me,
Thank you so
10
much.
poems, 10 poems to finally figure out what was in the parentheses. Oh, he's making, motions with his hands with this, his lips. It's like a little miracle. I'm just absolutely overwhelmed with what you have done to bring us into a new world. It's amazing. Thank you. Thank you so much. Oh.
You're certainly welcome. Thank you. And really, this book happened because for many years, I've been unable to perform the English and ASL at the same time. I can't read English and perform ASL. I just can't do it. It's two different languages. It just doesn't work to try to do both at the same time. And so it would mess up how the interpreters were voicing for the poems, things like that. So part of the reason for this is because I always found myself when I'm going around giving talks or doing readings, being unable to read the English and sign it in ASL and have that make sense. And so I developed my own system of glossing my poems so that I could practice the poem and I could give the poems in English and ASL gloss to the interpreter so that they could prepare. And the interpreter practices that. They look at the ASL gloss to get a sense of my timing, my translations, and they know how I'm going to sign the line and so forth. But with this, then this was a way for me to make sure I was choosing the right verbs and sign that made sense, conceptually appropriate. And the gloss gave me those choices and I mapped them out to be able to perform them. So then I could rehearse with the gloss, rehearse the ASL gloss and not look at the English of the poems that I'd already written. And that way my ASL was closer to form, closer to what ASL should be, and not, if you will, tied down to the English or bound by it, or unduly influenced by it. Trying to get a pure, projection of the ASL when I was performing it. And so really that's how it developed. And several years ago, I was giving a talk and somebody came up and saw some of my papers and noticed that that was gloss and said, you know what, you need to publish some of this. I was a little surprised at the idea, and I thought, you know what, why not? And so, funny enough story, you're involved in publishing and whatnot. You probably have heard of Poetry Magazine, a very distinguished journal in Chicago, hard to get into, very popular. Well, they get about 150,000 submissions a year. And, I've been trying for years to get in, for years. And then, shocker, all of these big names, publishers had turned down some of these poems. But then I had this one, Gazelles, which you can find online, and by the Poetry Foundation, I think, .org. And that poem, Gazelles, that poem was written in English on one side with the gloss on the other. That was selected as my first entry, and I made it in with that. But it was something of a surprise to find that people were very interested to interact with this ASL gloss, but it's been a thrill. Any other questions?
Yeah. I took a class or two in what I thought was ASL, and I knew that it was not just English signed, but this has really opened my mind to the completely different, it has a completely different syntax, completely different sentence structure, I guess you could say. And I just thank you for opening that world to me.
Thank you. I'm gonna, and thank you. I see you there. Thank you. A story that comes to mind about this is that, well, a lot of people and they end up learning like sign language in a way that is trying to mimic English. Okay, so a little history here of deaf education. In deaf education, very often, deaf people have been seen as an opportunity to experiment with different methods. So they have had for some reason, people think it's okay to go ahead and experiment on deaf kids in their language. We would never do that to Spanish language children, right? But anyway, there was somebody who said, you know what, why don't we take ASL in this language that they're doing and instead initialize all the signs, put letters on every single sign so that it represents English. And this is a bad example, but in ASL, for example, this is the sign for walk, right? Or like this with the two flat hand shapes. But this method of signing exact English would take that W that sign and sign the sign for walk. The natural sign for walk would now be made into this ugly thing with two W's making their way around. And it's often been mocked for the way it tries to instill English, but it was intended to teach deaf kids how to sign in English word order. And they did it by this method of interjecting these letters and made it hard to follow. And this is, for example, I will go outside to walk. I mean, so ungainly. Whereas ASL says, outside, I'm going to walk.
Okay. I think
So
the problem.
that's one of the problems that we've experienced is that hearing people say, I know sign language, and strangers will come up to me and say, hey, you know what? I know how to sign. I know sign language, and all they know is their alphabet. Okay, you know, and I appreciate that people have learned something, but be careful of when you say, I know sign language. But that brings to mind another story of Ironwood, where I grew up. I think what, 30 years ago, I was giving a talk there in Ironwood, and there were no interpreters, you know, but there was an actor who could, you know, sort of perform them in the poems and say. And there was a woman there who had taught them sign in the community college. And she came up and she saw me signing and was like, yeah, no, that's not American. Are you sure that's American Sign Language? No, no, no. That's not it. And I found out later that she apparently directed a play, Children of a Lesser God. And the play is about the story of a hearing teacher and a deaf woman. And so anyway, this woman was, you know, taught a way to sign ASL. And so in her home community, this woman was from somewhere in Wisconsin, and she was an ASL user. And that woman came to my talk. And she told me about that director in when the production of Children of a Lesser God, trying to force them to sign signed exact English instead of doing it in ASL, in actual language. And I felt awful at all these deaf actors being forced to sign in this difficult way. And, you know, and had to go off script, So I told her, you know what, normally I don't use my voice on stage, but because a lot of hearing people can't understand my speech. But at that moment, in that time, I saw there were probably 6 deaf people seated in the front row. So I said, you know what? This woman who has taught people this improper way to sign, that has made these deaf people's lives so much harder, I got to say something. So I said, there's a difference between signed exact English and American Sign Language, which is a language. Like these people up here in the front row, they're adept at the language of American Sign Language, American Sign Language. And the lady that taught in this community was mad. She got up and stormed out. She was so mad. But you know what? You got to listen to and respect deaf communities. It's our language. And that deaf woman, the lead actress in Children of a Lesser God, being forced to sign in this stilted, awkward, horrid way was abhorrent to me. And so that was just another example of ways in which hearing people can oppress deaf people. And it's so ironic that she was like a director for a play about deaf people, trying to enforce an artificial language on these native deaf signers. So, I mean, that's a concern that deaf people across the country feel and share, you know. And so I see that in the UP, you know, it's pretty difficult to find those resources. And so there. Okay, next question.
I don't really have a question, but I just want to say how educational this has been. I did not realize any of this, and perhaps I should be ashamed, but this is just fabulous. So I really want to tell you how important it is what you're doing. The education to people that aren't exposed to deaf people often and don't know anything about sign language. So this has been fantastic. So thank you.
Oh, that's okay.
Oh, thank you. That's okay. And, you know, I think as people read this, and, you know, sometimes some interpreters, when they're learning translation, some interpreters are you know, are really not keen on interpreting for poetry because it's one of the toughest things to do sometimes. And, you know, interpreters, in terms of like finding good interpreters that are available, like there's the classroom interpreter, your regular interpreter who can do what's in the classroom, the regular stuff the kids in K through 12 are experiencing day to day. Then there's college level interpreters and so forth. And then you have courtroom interpreters, which is a specialized in kind of interpreting, and they have special techniques in that. And then there are medical interpreters specialized for medicine. And then one of the most difficult things to do though is like theatrical interpreting, because that involves real translation of whole plays or poems or things of the like. It's very, very difficult. Translation is no easy task. It's not about just saying the words and what you heard. It's also about conveying the whole content and context of that message to the audience. And I think very often times when I go to other cities to present, the interpreters that they work with me, I really need them to be theatrically experienced, because I've had horrid experiences. One, in fact, where I'm not going to name them place that hosted me, but I went to this one place to present. I would say an audience of 500 probably, and it was a big reading. They couldn't find an interpreter. They couldn't find an interpreter. It was kind of a remote area, and not a lot of deaf communities nearby. Well, they had a classroom interpreter for K through 12, who just one who came, and she came up to me and she said, do you mind saying really slow for me today? I mean, there was a red flag right there, because the classroom interpreters don't have experience working into English from sign language, right? They're used to going in the other direction. I hear the teacher talking, I sign, and that's it. And they're very rarely giving, work into English. And so they're not used to passing information in the other way, and they're not good at receptive ASL. For me as a deaf person, to sign like that for 30, 40 minutes would be incredibly laborious. She came up to me and said, can you sign slow for me? And so I did my best. I was going through, when the whole thing was done, I had a hearing friend come up to me afterward and says, that interpreter made you sound like a fourth grader, just so you know. I was aghast. I felt so bad. But again, the quality of the interpreter can make a difference. It's just like going to the doctor. The quality of the interpreter is important. It's hard to find interpreters. You got to book them ahead of time. I went to a doctor about 5 months ago with a great interpreter, and one of the best in and Adam's one of the best interpreters in the DC area. That's why I love working with him. And I got to book him like months ahead of time often. So, okay, next question.
I have a question. Should we all have our screens blackened as we're doing this? Should we turn down our screens?
Sure. I don't care about show.
I mean,
Okay.
I think we're all fine. We're all fine.
Okay.
But when I'm performing the poem, it would be distracting to have a lot of tiles, Zoom tiles up, but now it's fine for people to be up. That's no problem.
Okay, good. I wanted to compliment you, Raymond, on the poetry itself. I've a lifelong Youper, and the mosquito. I thought you would read the mosquito. It's my favorite one.
Well, the people think
and I've heard people say the state bird is a mosquito in Minnesota. I think Michigan. We've got a good race out there to have it, because we'll all fight it out as our state bird, the mosquito. Oh boy.
So I think for those of you who are listening tonight, and for those of you who will watch the recording, this is the reason to buy this book. They're all great poems, like Sue said, but the mosquito, very good.
You're so kind. Thank you. Okay. Are there any more questions from anyone?
So how do you say thank you?
I'm sorry, I couldn't hear you.
How do you say thank you?
Oh, what's the truth there?
So there's a couple of signs. This one, see this handshake? Use this
Yeah.
handshake. Start at the chin and move outward. Thank you. Thank you. Okay.
Yeah.
Now, and then your welcome is done this way. Flat handshake, same handshake, but drawing
Think of
in towards the
butler.
chest. Think of like a butler who's welcoming someone in the door. That sort of movement. So thank you and you're welcome.
They know that
And
the way
truth, I don't know, there's not like one right sign for something, but like if you ask people in the deaf community,
yeah, not the but
and again, this isn't accepted in the deaf community necessarily, but like one of the signs for Michigan is MICH. We shorten Michigan to MICH. Like Wisconsin is WISC. There are abbreviations for some states, but when I lived in Washington D.C. and I got involved in deaf communities there, they would say, "Where in Michigan did you live?" And I figured out how to represent Michigan like this.
Yeah.
You see the state? All right.
I live
So
there. I live
here,
there.
there's these two
There's
parts of Michigan, right? And it's an awkward. It was a little bit of a strain to like figure out how to depict Michigan. But then, so I decided I had to come up with a sign for Uper, right? So I decided, what this part, this is part of that part of the Upper Peninsula that depicts it. So I use this sign and then the sign for a person. And I will also specify it by spelling out Uper in context, but then that becomes the sign for Uper. But you know, you can't just come up with a name sign for an area or a people. It has to find consensus within the people there that the language uses. It would be arrogant of me to say, you know what, here is the sign for those people. And so you have to kind of get the pulse of the community and see what the consensus is, what has been adopted, and there's a point at which it becomes more accepted and standard.
I'm sure
This is another example back in the 70s when President Nixon had his scandal with the Watergate. I'm sure you know all that. His sign name before that, before Watergate, after Watergate, it changed. So here's the sign for lie. You see this lie going across the chin? So they took the letter N after Watergate and turned his sign name into Nixon for liar. Yeah. And so they with his name, they tied it to the concept of lying. And it's indelibly connected to that now. And if you ask any deaf person for the sign for Nixon, if they may not even know what happened with Watergate, but they know that he's a liar. They know that because his name is signed Nixon in this way. And what's another good example of a name sign?
I thought people
and
Biden.
President Biden, sometimes people used this sign because, you know, he always wore the aviator glasses. This became a common sign for Biden. And there are many signs for the current president, which some are offensive, some are inoffensive. But there's not a sign that has found consensus for the current president. Let's see some other ones I'm trying to remember.
Bill Clinton.
Oh, Bill Clinton? Bill Clinton. So now, one of the most famous, you know, sad to say, but he had this big affair, right? So his sign name came to be Clinton, depicted in the sign for affair, to have cheated on someone. But within the deaf community, that sign is somewhat okay. But in any formal situation, nobody would sign that pejorative sign for them. And an interpreter would not typically be using that sign. But, you know, for President, you know, Nixon, they would say President and then fingerspell Nixon to keep it simple, you know, more respectful. Or the position and all of that. But yeah, name signs can sometimes be tied to those kinds of characteristics. And there are some that would give you a shock, I'm sure. Just for example, so my name sign, Raymond, is signed the way it is because I guess at age 18, I started growing a beard,
I
and
think
I've
they
had
have
one
shave
ever
off.
since. I may shave it off, but I mean, it's only been shaved completely 3 times since I was
No.
18 years old.
My
Always
beard
have
goes
some form of a
back.
beard, and it grows really fast, and I can get bushy and I knock it down, but I've always got a beard of some sort. So this became my name sign.
Also,
And then
small
also,
key.
kind of a little bit of a pet peeve of mine
Mm, mm,
is students who are
One of
learning
them
sign will
names.
make up their own sign names, and it's
There's
obvious.
Names.
Many
They come up.
name signs that they come up with violate some of the fundamental rules of ASL name signs. For example, name signs have to be simple. They're not incredibly complex. And just for example, I met a woman whose name was something or other that started with an L. I don't want to name her out, but she said this was her name because she fell sometime. But it's an awkward sign to sign quickly if you're just saying, oh, blah, 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 blah. L fell, or L something, and trying to reference her name. It's an awkward sign that is not easily produced. And I've seen some other ones where somebody said their name started with RW, and they did this double-handed strange sign. Like, if you have to think hard to produce the sign name, it's problematic. But sometimes, for example, there's sometimes very generic name signs too. That's the letter of their name put in a generic location, like the shoulder. That's generally held to be a somewhat generic location. But then when I got to Gallaudet, my name sign was different. My name sign was RL, right? Raymond Luczak, and I combined the two, RL, and it was over here on my shoulder. That's on my name signed originally. And that aligns with the rules of ASL grammar. It's not incredibly complex. It's clear, it's simple, and it's somewhat unique. But it changed over the years, and I got a more ASL sign name because those with letters are typically borrowed from English, in the spellings, and so they're somewhat avoided these days. It's not as in vogue. It's more in vogue to have purer ASL signs. But no language is pure. If a language is kept pure, it will die. Look what happened to Latin,
Latin. People tried
to keep Latin in its purest form. It didn't happen. Language lives. And so it is corrupted, but that corruption is evolution, is change. And I mean, that the best way for a language to thrive is for it to adapt and change.
I don't mean to be.
I know I'm meandering through a lot of linguistics and so forth, but any other questions? You're muted, Evelyn. I'm not hearing you.
That made me think of a question. So just because there's always new words in language, what is maybe a
I'm not
new
hearing
word?
you, Evelyn. Can you speak up a little bit?
I'm not muted.
Okay. It's not you. I'm sorry.
Oh, that's better.
Okay, try again.
Because there's always new words in language, what's maybe a new sign language word? Just something new that you've learned.
Nothing come to my mind, but
Nothing comes to mind right now, but I can show you a quick example of how language evolves. So this is a sign for phone, right? Back in the day, and now 100 years ago, the sign for phone was like this.
Okay.
Okay. And then it changed to this.
Now.
And now it's like this, the way you hold a mobile phone. And if you have an iPhone, some people sign it this way with an I. It's not as elegant a sign, but phone is now done with the flat hand. Sometimes it's even done in front of you now because that's where the phone is. The phone sign was almost always on your ear in the old days, but and I think the hearing people obsession with the phone is often taken as very much a negative thing, but hearing people sometimes don't want to talk on the phone. They would much rather text. So that's great for us as deaf people because it kind of levels the playing field for us. So many deaf people now sign phone, a mobile phone in front of you, not up on the ear. And who knows what the next generation's
I've had
design
someone
phone
looking
will be.
on new phone.
I think
AI phone.
they're working on an AI phone that has no screen now, which is really puzzling.
Good for deaf people.
I don't think that's going to be good for us as deaf people, but we'll see what gets developed.
Okay. Any more questions?
Okay, any more questions?
Okay, so how does that?
Please, Victor.
This is a little bit of a comment, but I really enjoy the way Raymond plays with point of view. It's something that you don't always see in poetry, a change in point of view. Like
Sorry, Victor, I'm missing parts of what you're saying. Would you repeat that, please?
All right, let me get closer to my laptop here.
That's better, closer. Thank you.
Okay. The change in point of view is very interesting from Raymond's poetry. As in tardigrade, we have the comparison of the world outside the log is as foreign as the UP. I mean, that is such a compact and meaningful piece of word. It's great. And the other one I wanted to say was the eagle. It feels like the point of view flips. The point of view changes halfway through, and now you're the eagle staring out. That's amazing. So, my comments.
Yeah.
Okay, are there any other questions or is it time to wrap up?
Well,
First of all, thank you to everyone who joined us tonight and watched. Very much. I appreciate you. Thank you.
Thank
oh,
you.
then we know the people.
Oh, and by the way, deaf people, we don't applaud with our hands clapping. Instead, we do this.
we can't get the crowd.
Because
but
deaf people
there's
can't
one
hear the song, but we can sing the visuals.
feeling and the arm,
And when you see a whole audience giving deaf applause, it's
the chord.
a little bit of deaf culture there for you. Thank you. Thank you all so much for watching.
You've been watching the UP Notable Books Club, brought to you by the Upper Peninsula Publisher and Authors Association. To join or for more information, please visit us at www.upa.org or www.upnotable.com.